Well, hello, good evening, everybody. Happy Friday night, and welcome to Virtual Third Place Books. Wherever you're joining us from this evening, we are awfully glad to have you. My name is Sam. Those of you who know me from here in the Seattle area, from our three stores, Lake Forest Park, Ravenna, and Seward Park, may recognize me from our author events program. I'm often up on stage introducing some of our favorite authors when they come through Seattle. And this year, while we have been unable to host authors in the store, we have been on stage virtually here, welcoming our favorite authors from all around the country and all around the world here on the World Wide Web, and using the amazing technology of the 21st century to pipe your favorite writers right into your living room or wherever we find you tonight. And one of the cool things about doing these virtual events is that people from all around the country and all around the world can join us. So wherever you're joining us from tonight, if you're coming to Third Place Books for the first time, welcome. We're glad to have you. And we're also very glad to be here with two authors who are a little closer to home, both Seattle area writers who we are very fond of and are just thrilled to be hearing from tonight. I have just a couple of announcements to make before we begin. And the first one has to do with books. As most of you know, we are here to celebrate the release of a book. It is The Nightworkers by Brian Selfon, out this week for the very first time. It was released on Tuesday. There it is. It has one of the cooler covers that I've seen this year. It is a gorgeous hardcover edition from our friends at MCD Books, FSG Editions. It is an excellent read. I have been enjoying reading it this week, and if you're not already convinced that you want it, by the end of the evening, I think you will be. So here's how this is going to work. I am going to drop a link into the chat to purchase The Nightworkers from Third Place Books. And if you have not done so already, I encourage you to do so this evening. If you're out of the Seattle area, we can ship that book to you anywhere in the country, USPS Media Mail, starting at the very reasonable rate of $3.50, and supporting our postal service, which Third Place Books and other small businesses rely on every single day. Or if you're here in the Seattle area, you can put a copy on hold to be picked up at one of our three stores, Lake Forest Park, Ravenna, or Seward Park. And either way, you're going to want to get your hands on The Nightworkers. So keep an eye out for that link in the chat, and please, I encourage you to pick up a copy of this great new novel. The holidays are coming. Shop early, shop often, and I think you're going to want to get this for a few of the readers on your list. And we thank you so much, because your book purchase is what helps support Third Place Books and allows us to keep doing events like this and to keep working and bringing you authors and different voices from all around. And it is also what supports your favorite authors like Brian Selfon and Katrina Carrasco, and allows them to keep writing and keep bringing us these excellent stories and these amazing characters. So don't be shy, hit that link when it comes up, and we will send you a book. And I will also drop a link in the chat to Katrina Carrasco's wonderful novel from a couple of years ago, The Best Bad Things, another favorite at Third Place Books and another favorite of mine. And I think you're going to want to pick that one up as well. Now, we're doing a lot of these author events right now, 2 to 3 of them a week, sometimes more. And so there's sure to be something else that you will enjoy. And if you enjoy your evening tonight and you want to see what else we got going on, I encourage you to visit thirdplacebooks.com. You can check out our calendar, see what else we've got coming up. You can subscribe to our email newsletter, and you can get a weekly update on the new events that we have coming up. Exciting things being added every single day right now, all of them online, typed to you in your home, wherever you are. You can also follow us on social media. We're at Third Place Books on most of the major platforms, and we love to hear from you and love to interact, so please do look us up. Now, tonight, if you have questions, we encourage you to drop those into the Q&A module. That's at the bottom of your screen. If you hover your cursor at the bottom of the screen, you'll see it pop up. It's just a little button that says Q&A, and you can click on that. You can type your question in, and we'll get to as many questions as we have time for at the end of the evening. And now, without further ado, I am thrilled to be helping to welcome this novel into the world. I was talking to Brian and Katrina before we went live with this about the first time that I read the description of The Nightworkers and saw it in a catalog from the publisher, and I thought that is a novel I'm going to want to read. That is an author that we want to host at Third Place Books when this book comes out. And it was especially cool because Brian is a local, lives here in the Seattle area, and we were so excited to launch his book. And, you know, the world had other plans from doing an in-person book launch, but we are so glad that thanks to the power of the internet, we are able to bring this incredible debut novel, a book that none other than great friend of Third Place Books, Harlan Coben, called a gripping, big-hearted thriller, whip smart and surprisingly funny. Hard agree, Harlan, hard agree. Into the world. And so we're so glad that you're all here to help us welcome it in. It just came out this Tuesday, and the book is The Nightworkers. Brian Selfon has worked in criminal justice for nearly 20 years, more than 15 of them at law enforcement agencies in New York. As chief investigative analyst for the Brooklyn District Attorney's Office, he handled cases ranging from money laundering to first-degree murder. Now, Brian lives with his family in Seattle, right here, where he works as a public defense investigator and moonlights as a novelist. And his debut novel, again, is The Nightworkers. Joining Brian this evening is another favorite from Third Place Books, Katrina Carrasco. Katrina Carrasco is queer and Latinx with roots in Southern California and home here in Seattle, and we are so glad to have her. Her debut novel, The Best Bad Things, which has hands down one of the most intense opening sequences that I have ever read. You pick it up and you will be hooked. Just trust me. Was a finalist for the Land Literary Awards and the Washington State Book Awards, and won the Seamus Award for Best New PI Novel. Her short fiction and essays have appeared in Witness, Autostraddle, Literary Hub, Post Road, and elsewhere, and she's currently at work on a new book. Please, from wherever you are tonight, join me in welcoming Brian Selfon and Katrina Carrasco. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Sam. And let me give a big thank you to Third Place Books. I love the bookstore. I hope that anybody who's on this tonight will follow the link and pick out a book from them. There's a bookstore branch of Third Place Books near me, and I've gone running there. I've gone biking with my son there, and it's just a fantastic bookstore to support. Also want to say a big thank you to Katrina Carrasco, who is a beautiful writer, and I feel very honored to be sharing the space with her tonight. I think I'm going to start by reading, unless you want to say something, Katrina.
No, just I'm glad to be doing this event with you, and congratulations on your debut launch. This is so exciting. So I'm excited to hear you read.
Thank you. So this is my book. It's called The Nightworkers, and I'm just going to read a little bit from the opening. I just said this to Katrina and Sam, but I have found that at a number of book events, not all of them, but sometimes the low point is when the author reads their book. So I'm not going to spend too much time reading this, but I'm just going to read from the beginning. So chapter 1, the first time he meets Emil Scott, he falls in love. They're at an art opening in Bushwick, the latest neighborhood in Brooklyn to burst with creatives and almosts. For over an hour, Henry Veck and Emil Scott have circled each other without realizing it. Then it's like an old rom-com. Their eyes lock across the room. They look away. They're straight-ish for 2014, and the rule is you have to look away. Then, oh so carefully, they find their way to the same painting. And it's here, standing close to the painting, close to each other, that Emil taps the back left pocket and asks if Henry wants to buy some heroin. And I think that's probably enough of the book for tonight.
All right, you ready to just jump into our conversation?
Yeah, let's do some.
Okay, so my first question for you is, after reading the book, which is just so densely set in New York and Brooklyn, and it's really just such a place-based book in so many ways, which I really loved. I love that kind of writing. I wanted to know more about your connection to New York. Like, did you grow up there? How long did you live there? And why did you choose to set the book there? What made this book like a Brooklyn story?
So I grew up in Michigan, and I lived there for about 19 years. And I moved to New York in 2000, and I lived there for about 17 or 18 years. And during the writing of the book, where I was coming up with the idea for the story and making the big structural changes, I was in Brooklyn and in New York for all of that time, although I did make significant revisions once I got out here. So New York was just kind of in the air. It was in the things that I was seeing as I was writing. And it was just, and to some extent, I think of this book as a community art project. I got a lot of very good notes from my writers group, Abby Beshkin and Tori Fullard. I got amazing edits from my editor, Daphne Durham, and I don't mean to make this my Oscar speech, but I do think that this book was a collaboration, even though my name is on the cover. And I think that one of the significant collaborators was the city I was in while I was writing it.
I have a question later on about moving to Seattle and how that sort of changed how you saw Brooklyn and the setting of the book, but I'm going to leave that for a little bit later.
Okay.
The next one that I wanted to know about is, was there a seed for the story, like an episode or something you encountered at work, or an idea that was the inspiration for it? Like what for you was kind of the first like germ of the novel?
So before I worked for the Brooklyn DA's office, I had a job where I was focused mostly on white collar crime. And white collar crime is not that different from filing papers and sending out mail or sending emails. It's kind of boring while it's happening, and it's also a little bit boring to investigate. So once in a while, my office would give opportunities to do not real undercover work, but kind of light undercover work that would involve going out of the office. So I tried to volunteer for that whenever that happened. And there was one case that came out of the Civil Rights Bureau of my office where the allegation were that there were these expensive apartments in downtown Manhattan. And if somebody was applying to get an apartment there, if you were a white person applying to get an apartment, they would have certain requirements, like you have to put down 1 month's down lease and 1 month for the first month's rent. But if you were a Black prospective renter, they might ask you for double that amount, like you have to do 2 months rent. So they would have people be fake prospective renters, and I got a fake name, and I went in and just was walking around these apartments that I could never afford and pretending to open the closet doors and look at them and turn on the sink and just, shopping around. And so in opening one of the closet doors, I had the thought, and this maybe suggests some type of, anyway, I thought like, oh, wouldn't it be interesting if I opened this door and a body fell out? And that became the seed of a book that I spent a couple of years on, but then ultimately set aside. But then that same seed also led to the Nightworkers. So writing that first book and putting it aside kind of gave me some basis, some like ruins to build, to use to build the Nightworkers from that.
Mm-hmm. I had a similar experience with the first book I finished, where in the end it's shelved forever, but I used so many of the bones, I think, to build what became the Best Bad Thing. So I think sometimes as authors, we have ideas or things we're kind of obsessed with and we circle around until we find the right way to write it down. So
Mm-hmm.
I definitely relate to that experience. I was very intrigued by your bio, and I know that you're kind of downplaying the interest of the jobs that you had, but could you tell us a little more about the work you did and how it informed the book? Like, what does an investigative analyst do? Like, you went undercover sometimes. Is it exciting? Or, I mean, you make it sound not exciting, but I think it maybe might have been a little exciting sometimes.
Yeah, no, I don't mean to trash any of my past jobs, and I definitely wouldn't trash my current job. But so I worked mostly with prosecutors. I was surrounded by prosecutors, and usually at the head of my office was the main prosecutor for the state or the city, or I'm sorry, the state or Brooklyn in the case of my last job. So the cops were the ones that were, out on the streets doing the field work. And sometimes we would work with city police or state police, and sometimes we used our own in-house detective. The analyst in many cases would be looking through bank records, looking through insurance records, looking at telecommunications records. And these could be exciting when there was a breakthrough, but the work that led to the breakthrough wasn't a ton of fun. An upside to that is there were times where it was so automatic in a way that I could listen to audiobooks while I was doing it. And so those were exciting times where it felt like I was getting paid to listen to an audiobook. But my work product could be something like a map that shows the locations of a phone. Let's say that there's a murder and you might be able to see the person who is the main suspect. You could see their phone going toward the location, and then you could see it going away from the location at the right times. So those maps could become exhibits at trials, or they could just be used to help understand what happened. Sometimes the job would involve listening in on wiretaps. And again, that is exciting to hear like the idea of a wiretap. But again, with white collar crime, it's kind of like you're listening to people making pretty slow, quiet transactions that don't have all the excitement that you might expect.
A lot of this, though, I can see how it informs the book and just your knowledge with, like Shecky's ledgers and the way that they track Emil's phone, and just having that context for the kinds of crimes that the family is engaging in. It sounds like it provided some of the texture and knowledge for that.
Yeah, and I did get to see across a lot of years how money laundering is a common thread for pretty much all major financial crimes. Like if you just rob somebody on the street, you don't necessarily need a money launderer. But if you're making a career doing, anything from gun smuggling or, big drug sales to insurance fraud or bank fraud or embezzlement, once you get enough money that you don't want to just keep it in a suitcase, you have to try to get it into the system. So seeing money laundering for the many years that I was working with law enforcement is part of, I think, what made it interesting to use in my book, because you see the family in the book interacting with people who seem like friendly mom and pop people who have a shop and they don't want to spend taxes. So how to hide the money. But you also see them interacting with some more dangerous people. And so there's a little bit of an edge there. And I think it's still in the final version of the book that the family charges different rates depending on how dangerous they determine the client's business to be.
And is that a common practice too in real world money laundering, where there's like a sliding scale based on risk?
That might be a detail that I made up for the book. So yeah.
Well, it was convincing to me. So, well done. Kind of switching gears a little bit to the topic of art. I loved how much each of the main characters in the family they were in their own way an artist of some kind. Like Shecky is really into the drama and the stage directions, especially remembering with his sister. Henry is very into the visual arts, which his connection with Emil kind of draws on that. And then Kerasha is very much like a words person with poetry and books. What kind of went into your decision to have the family of money launderers also sort of be artists in their own way? And how did you use that to build their characters?
So that was a kind of way to keep myself interested. I might read something, maybe a poem, or hear some music, or see a work of art, and just have it in my head, and I'm trying to think about it. And then it would be something like, well, maybe I could think about it through writing about it. But then I would have this question of, okay, how can I possibly include this ancient Greek tragedy in this book about a family of money launderers? So then I had to sort of reverse engineer, like, let me give the character a backstory where he's very interested in drama from a young age. And then I can say his sister is interested in drama and his sister has died. And it's similar with art and also with poetry, that I wanted to include it mostly because I was interested in, and the book was a way for me, and I'm sure for a lot of other people, writing can be a way to think. So I was thinking about it through writing, but then I had to do some work to make it plausible in the book. I think it had a good effect of having me think very carefully about the characters' backstories and create characters. So it wasn't just like the character found a book and they loved it, like have a specific character introduce the character into, our drama, and have them get turned on in that way.
It really worked for me too in terms of forming sort of the language for each character, like their vocabulary of thinking, kind of, where like Shecky would often think of in terms of stage direction, like he would phrase his thoughts that way, or his internal thoughts would be shaped this way. And then Kerasha as well, like almost has a poetic voice in some of the scenes, especially later on in the book when her headspace is getting a little more wobbly and sort of untrustworthy. And I think having those different vocabularies for each of the characters was really effective, kind of separate from the effect of having this family of the money launderers also sort of be artists. It gave them a very clear through line and personality, I think, that really tied the characters together for me.
Thank you, David.
I just thought it worked really well. My next question is kind of multi-part. Maybe I will ask it in parts, but why did you decide to make this a crime novel? And what about human nature or people or life were you kind of exploring by putting your characters in this genre, in this situation?
I've written in other genres, and I read books in lots of different genres too. So I think that, that this one happens to be the one that, is connecting to an audience is exciting for me. But I didn't set out to think like this is going to be definitely a crime novel. I sort of had that little seed idea for a plot, and I just kind of built it out from there. I do think that crime is interesting for a lot of different reasons, including that, I have sometimes wondered if almost every, I don't want to say every, but every good book is about it in some major part of it, a transgression, and maybe it's not against the law, but it could be, against family codes like an adultery, or it could be somebody who's breaking social rules in different ways. So, this one is literally a crime novel because there's crimes committed from the first paragraph, which I just read to you. But I do think that, for me, the transgressions of the law that are kind of like the main A plot are running parallel along different transgressions that the characters are going through in their separate private lives too.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think when I think about writing in this genre, or writing in anything with sort of a crime setting, even as the backdrop, I feel like in some ways, at least for me, it gives the chance to sort of magnify the compromises we all make in life by putting them in these very extreme circumstances, like if it's actually breaking the law, or if there's a murder or something that makes it like very stark. But I think there's the question of like, are there good characters? Like, what if you don't have any characters who are considered like good people? And then in this book, there's such a sense of family, and there's this compromise between like what Shecky needs to do to keep his family safe, and then his work that he's doing, which is very much illegal and deadly. And I love that space where it really like puts it on a tightrope, the considerations of that you might make as a normal person on a day-to-day basis. You might make all these kinds of different decisions where you're, measuring risk and doing things maybe sometimes you're not proud of. But I think in a setting like this, it's just so laid out that I think you can really get into the compromises of being a person and having conflicting obligations.
Right. It's not, I think, a coincidence that I wrote this, having spent a long time in the, in the law enforcement world, but I think it's also not a coincidence that this came out when I started writing this around the same time that I became a dad. So I was thinking a lot about family dynamic. I was like spending my days looking at videos of shootings, but then I'd go home and be reading about how to care for your baby. And so thinking about my connection with my wife and with my son, and thinking about my connection with my own parents and how I was raised, I think that got baked into the book. I didn't necessarily work on a scene and think like, let me draw on this little thing from my life. But I think that came out in some of the feeling that I was writing.
I think definitely the book has a lot of dad energy, and I say that with love because I love dad energy, but just that sense of there's so much tenderness in the scenes, especially between Shecky and the two kids, the two younger people. Just the care he puts into making their meals and making their beds. And I feel like that's such an underpinning of the family and the kind of the storm that's going on around them, partially of their own making, but at the center of it is there's just like such a palpable sense of love that he has for the two young people that he's taken in. And I thought that was really effective in terms of having the core family and then sort of the drama around it, that the different like back and forth between those two poles I thought was really compelling to read. So
thank you. I mean, that did come, and so that's a case where it did come directly from my life, because I'd be working on a scene and then I would just write, I would include whatever I was cooking that day in the scene. So
the food is all very, very well written, and I was hungry most of the time. So
thank you.
So this is kind of the question I was going to return to earlier, but I wanted to ask about what it was like working on the book after you moved to Seattle, and how being away from Brooklyn helped you visualize or experience the setting in a different way. You said you'd made some revisions after the move, and I was just wondering, kind of from a craft perspective, what changed for you, and if that distance like helped, or if you felt that it caused barriers in the writing, or how you experienced that.
I mean, I think that a lot of the location stuff was fixed from an early draft, but then there were additional huge changes that made after I came here. I mean, I got great notes from my writers group. I got amazing edits from my editor and Daphne, if you're on the line, thank you very much. But yeah, so I think though, while I was here, I still had enough of Brooklyn in my head that I didn't have to, Google coffee shops or anything like that to find out where to put the characters. I think that having spent 17 years mostly living in Brooklyn, it wasn't hard if I needed a scene to throw it someplace. I did move the location of the book within Brooklyn, because when I started it, it was set in a neighborhood called Williamsburg, which was kind of the hipster neighborhood of Brooklyn. I think when I wrote the earlier book that I threw away, and then, that the Nightworkers came out of, but then that neighborhood, Williamsburg, became so gentrified by the time I started the Nightworkers that it became unrealistic to think that a lot of people that originally were living there were kind of getting priced out of it. So I had to move it to like an edgier neighborhood. So I shifted it to Bushwick. I think that might have even happened while I was in Seattle, but yeah, I mean, again, I did have enough of Brooklyn in my head, but also I was mostly using Brooklyn very fictitiously. I didn't, I just wanted a scene to be at a coffee shop. So I would just think like, where's a coffee shop that I should use? And then I would look around and be like, oh, I'm in a coffee shop. I'll just use this place. So in most cases, I could spend a lot of time thinking about a sentence or a feeling that I was trying to get, and then not that much time thinking about the staging. But then very often readers would not respond to, the thing that I was thinking the most about, but they would get excited about the location, which is great in both ways. So it's grounding for me to remember that people care about like what's happening and where things are happening. And that's definitely something that I got a lot of help with from the many, many people who read early drafts. There could be just 3 pages of noodling around thinking about nothing, and people would be like, oh, this is interesting, but what if it wasn't in the book? Wouldn't that be interesting too? And those types of responses definitely help make the book more readable and more physical than just like, let's think about the thoughts that the other character is thinking. What is that character thinking about me? And then, have the other character thinking about the thoughts of the first character. So again, like, that stuff, those types of edits came out while I was in Seattle, and I also got good notes on that while I was in Brooklyn.
Yeah, I feel like reading the book was interesting because I'm not a New Yorker and I'm a little familiar, but also, I mean, I was going to Brooklyn for an event and didn't realize that Brooklyn was massive and that I ended up like booking somewhere to stay that was actually very far in traffic away from where I was trying to be. No idea. So it was nice to read the book almost as like a visiting tourist.
Right.
But I'm sure you had all of your New York friends and co-readers to keep you accurate with the setting.
Yeah,
So.
no, people have checked me about setting, and that's much appreciated, because again, I just would try to pluck a name out of my head so I could focus on the conversation that the characters were having. And it's very helpful to get notes to remind me, to have people in a place and actually be doing things in a place.
Mm-hmm. I feel like I was cheating a bit with my book because I set it in a really tiny place, so I didn't have to like track people around too much. But the one I'm doing now is in Tacoma and it's big, and I'm like, oh no. But
you had to do. I mean, your book is so. I'm gonna flip the interview for a minute. Like with your book and the way that you were writing it, it's set in historic time. I mean, not deep back in the history, but back enough. Like, were you writing and then fact checking afterwards, or were you doing the history research and then building from that?
I do a lot of research before I start, and then I stop so that I can like grow off of that. But it was really nice for Port Townsend and now for Tacoma because they're fire maps from those times. So it's actually like a platted map of the town with like the kinds of structures like stone, wood, plank, like it's all noted. And there's even stuff like small outhouse, like it's extremely detailed. And you can get those on the Library of Congress site. So I found one for Port Townsend the year before the book is set, and I have one for Tacoma. And it's nice because I can't go to many of these places, like even in Port Townsend, which is really well preserved, so much of it has changed and a lot of the buildings are gone. But I can start from a really concrete map and then at least know where I'm going. Because I think if I didn't have any kind of map, I would just lose all my bearings, like in my imagination as well as on the page. But it is a challenge moving from like a little space to a bigger space. And I feel like the Bushwick area is pretty big just compared to like a small tiny town. So having your characters know where they are is always a good challenge. And thank you, Daphne, also for keeping us on track with edits.
Yep.
So I wanted to ask about a very topical question, which is how are you keeping your writing practice going and your writing community right now when we can't really go anywhere? Obviously there's Zoom, and writing is a very individual kind of practice already, but you have your writing community and your group. So how are you doing with that? How are you producing things when the world is so chaotic? What's it been like in your writing life this past year?
Yeah, I mean, things have gotten much messier, but I do want to, this is a perfect excuse to shout out to my writers group, my Seattle writers group, which is Carrie and Catherine and Mike. And I don't know if any of you guys are on, but they're all working on brilliant books, and I'm excited for them to find an audience too. But yeah, we've had Zoom meetings, we've exchanged manuscripts through email. I think that they've been hugely helpful to me, and it's been such a great way of disengaging selectively from the pandemic without forgetting about it, but just, stepping back from it and focusing on some fiction to help work through it. I suspect that all of our work has been influenced by the pandemic. I think maybe the stories have gotten a little bleaker than they would have been without it, but we don't have, an alternate version of things to know whether that's true. But yeah, I do think that obviously the pandemic and other big events that have been happening lately have affected writing time. So, scrounging for writing time has been something that I've been, learning how to do pretty much since I graduated college, because I've always been working while I've been writing, but definitely since my kids were born. But my writing maybe had less time in it, but got significantly more emotion in it once my son was born. So however much I might be thinking about like, oh, I need to spend more time writing, I do recognize that with me becoming a dad, my books got a lot more, my writing got a lot more feeling in it. And so it kind of woke up something in me that's been, a gift for my life most of all, but then also in a smaller part of that, a gift to my writing. Can I ask you the same question?
Yeah, I mean, it's been hard. I think early on in the pandemic, I started sort of like a virtual writer Zoom, which I kept inviting you to, but you were busy. But it was just a nice way where we would like log on for 10, 15 minutes and everyone just say hi, and then everyone log off again and go work. So it wasn't like you had to check in or write together, but it was more like almost trying to replicate the experience of like writing in a coffee shop together, or at least having some human faces before you dive into your writing time. And I found that to be really helpful because with everything going on, it got me at my desk twice a week in the evening to draft. And then with the protests in June, I just got derailed. And I felt like I had responsibility to be away from my desk and being a little more participatory in the outside world. So lost some writing ground, but at the same time, as writers, we're also people, and like you having your family and everyone having their own personal lives and the world happening around us that we need to participate in. I think there's just a balance to be struck there between finding your work time and making sure that you're showing up where you want to be otherwise. So definitely it's been a challenge, but I'm starting those up again in the fall. So I'll send you an email about that.
Thank you.
If you want to log on. I think, so we're just about to the time we're going to do Q&A. So I just wanted to remind everyone that if you have questions, you can put them in the Q&A box, and we'll probably kick that off in a few minutes. I know you mentioned your writers group, but do you have anything that you're reading now that you're really excited about?
Yeah, I mean, I do want to shout out to my writers group. Like my writers group are working on great books. Mike Monroe, I'm probably not using their right pen name, so I don't know if I'm allowed to say this. So just there is going to be a book called Bitter Lake, which is amazing. There is going to be a book called I think it's called Devil May Pay or Devil to Pay. Am I allowed to say the name of the person who's writing it? I don't know. I'll hold back on it. And then there's another book. I can't remember what it's called, but it's a beautiful coming of age story set in Detroit in the 50s. And yeah, I'm excited about all of these books. So those are the books that I'm most excited about in the fiction world. And I just started reading Cast by Isabel Wilkerson in the nonfiction world, which is horrifying and enlightening, and based on only 100 pages into it, though. It's like the book or one of the books of our times that I think is really connecting. Can I ask you the same question, Kate?
Yeah, so I'm kind of splitting my time right now between two books. One is nonfiction as well. It's Looking for Lorraine, and it's about Lorraine Hansberry by Amani Perry. And it's just really beautifully written. And there's also, just coincidentally, there's a miniseries coming out that's about like the queer rights movement as it built. And there's a series where Samira Wiley plays Lorraine Hansberry. I'm really excited to watch this. It's actually playing at the Seattle Queer Film Festival in a week. So I think you can still get tickets if anyone's interested. The other book I'm reading that I'm really enjoying is Fierce Femmes and Notorious Liars by Kai Cheng Tom. And it's so beautifully written, and it's very episodic, but it's also really heavy because it's sort of magical realism, but the setting and the context is a lot of the violence that trans women live through. So it's very beautiful, but it catches, like it sneaks up on you when you sort of like process through the beautiful language and the symbolism that's happening, sort of the difficult contents. But really recommend both of those. I've been reading less than I normally do, I think, in quarantine, just because of stress. But I have a growing TBR pile. And I read your book in like a day, so that was very welcome. It's nice to have something that's a page turner, to be like a good few hours to check out of the world from time to time.
Thank you for saying that. Yeah, I just want to point out that Sam is posting into the chat links to books. And again, I hope that people will consider buying books from Third Place Books, which is hosting this event and is also just a great bookstore.
I know I got to do one of my events at Third Place and it was so wonderful. So I'm glad that they're still able to host stuff this year. I was kind of going to wrap us up for the Q&A. Is there any last thing that you want to talk about before we switch to that part?
Let's do it.
Okay, we have a lot of questions. I'm going to attempt to field them for you.
I'll look at them too.
Let's see. Okay, during your writing process, did you ever slip into writing something too close to a real person or scenario from your previous jobs? And if so, how do you draw inspiration from real experiences while ensuring the fictionalization of the story?
So I'm going to answer that question, but me being new to this and me being kind of just an excited little dopey person, I see that Vicky Spellman is on the chat, and hello, Vicky Spellman. It is great to hear from you. I'm mostly making up things. I don't think that I've had an issue where I was using anything real. I'm trying to think if I'm making an exception to this. I also think that I don't live that much in reality in general. So I think even if I wanted to do something real, I would just not get it right. I do think that some of the ways that, like there are some details that were easy for me to throw in. Like I need like a money laundering spot. Like, let me just throw in like, okay, they're going to use, they're going to send a wire. Like those things I didn't really need to research, but I've worked on many, many cases and I didn't include like any actual people. I kind of included some feelings that I had while I was writing. Like I've worked on wiretaps where I liked the person that I was listening to and I felt like sad that they were incriminating their families by having them, make bank deposits for them. I've liked people whose jail calls I've listened to because they were caught up in like a bribery scheme involving a corrections officer. So I think that, but those people and the details of their lives are not in the book, but just, I think that something that did come from my day job into the book are just me having, in many cases, connections with people who I could see were making very bad decisions, either for themselves or bad decisions that were affecting other people. And hopefully, I'm sorry, I think that's my answer.
Okay, next one. Did you primarily write start to finish or with the ending first? Oop, it just jumped on me. And how did you know when your novel was done?
I would say it's probably never done. Like if my editor, Daphne, were to tell me now, like, you know what, maybe we should like work a little bit more on the ending, I would totally buy that. I never saw it as this gem that just came out and couldn't be changed. Even while I was working on it, I would try out different things. And sometimes readers would say, go back and undo those changes, or sometimes readers would get excited by those changes. I mentioned before that for me, the writing of this book was very collaborative. So people would give me ideas, or they would say like, this scene isn't working. And that would like maybe my first knee-jerk reaction would be like, how dare you, you never understood me. But then that could lead to a change that would, affect different parts of the book and work out. So I'd say even now, I don't necessarily feel that it's done. Just reading that paragraph to the for this thing, I was kind of revising a little bit in my head, but I'm excited to be working on my new book and not on this one anymore. So,
yeah. Nice. Do you think Seattle will be a character in the future work, the way Brooklyn is essentially a character in the Nightworkers?
I think that's a great question. So I'm working on a new book now that I have, it's going to be in Brooklyn. And then I think the book after that, I also have a definite Brooklyn book. So I think I've got at least 2 more Brooklyn books before I go to Seattle book. But yeah, I am loving living in Seattle, and my day job now has me going out to different neighborhoods and exploring different communities that wouldn't necessarily be within my bubble. So I do see, similar to when I was in Brooklyn, there's like more good stuff out there than I'll ever be able to use in, my little lifetime. So Seattle is a fun place to live in, and it's a fun place to write.
One day we can drink coffee in coffee shops again. Another
Yeah,
perk.
that'll be nice.
That'll be great. Okay, this one is a comment and a question. Laura says, first, I love the description of both transgressions of the law and also transgressions of characters' private lives running parallel. Are you thinking about a second book at this time? And if so, what might be the primary or secondary transgressions? What's next?
So yeah, I am working on a new book that is already like a couple of years old as a draft. Some of the characters who don't die in the Nightworkers, who are kind of minor characters in the Nightworkers, maybe take bigger roles in the new book. And, I can give you, the elevator pitch, even though this book might end up getting thrown out and then another book will rise from the ashes. But the elevator pitch of the new book is that two college-age sisters launch their own investigation after their dad is arrested for a crime that they think he never could have committed. And one of the sisters is trying to work things out in the court, and the other sister is trying to get justice in the streets. So it's about the sisters' relationships with each other, and then also just about the mess that happens to a family when somebody gets arrested. And that one has a little, I don't know what the right way to describe it is, but that one did come from an idea that I had, or I guess an observation that I had when I was doing the trials that I worked on when I was in Brooklyn, which was the case numbers for the cases that were being called up. The first numbers were always the year of, when the person was first arrested. So I would see, like it would be 14 / and then whatever the case number was. And maybe I was doing this in 2016. And I kept thinking that there were typos because I didn't understand how a person could have been arrested 2 years ago, but then just going to trial now. And that kind of woke me up a little bit to the idea that somebody who is presumed innocent can spend an enormous amount of time in jail. And then it got me thinking, even, when I was working for the prosecutor side, just about, what it means to have somebody who's being punished when they haven't been convicted of something. And then also, again, when they're presumed innocent. So I think some of those thoughts were kicking around mostly in the back of my head, but a little bit in the front of my head. And that also is a little bit of what got me to thinking about maybe I could do something for a public defender's office that might be, akin to what I was doing in the prosecutor's office. Although it wasn't like I had this revelation and then I just said, I'm gonna, never work in for a prosecutor's office again, but it did just kind of get the gears turning in my head, even while I was back there.
Okay.
Am I allowed to ask you the same question?
You're gonna have to ask it again because I'm doing like 3 things.
Okay, I'm sorry. Are you able to talk any more about what you're working on now?
Oh, I can't. I mean, it's a follow-up to Best Bad Things, but I also don't talk about works in progress just because I change my mind so much.
Right.
So it's happening, but it's very much under wraps till I get my own brain wrapped around it. But
Gotcha.
I would love to talk more about it with you offline.
Yeah, well, post me.
Okay. Let's see. Did you have an idea of the story arc when you started this book, or was your process for the Nightworkers more exploratory? So their question is craft, like, are you a plotter versus a pantser? If you're familiar with that, like fly by the seat of your pants or plot everything in advance.
They said a plotter versus a pantser?
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, there might be like another category of the disaster where I would carefully plan things out and my plan would be bad. So I would painstakingly map out like this is going to lead to that. And people wouldn't necessarily understand what was going on. And maybe I myself would be confused about what's going on. So I think in some cases I would invest a lot of time in plotting and then realize that my plot, really didn't work out well. So with apologies for repeating myself, this is where my writers group, like my first writers group, Abby Beshkin and Tori Fullard would let me know, like, oh, this is really interesting. It just doesn't make any sense at all. And then, I would get different versions of that response up until the final, edits where in some cases, even like the proofreaders who are just supposed to be looking for commas that are out of place would point out that like the scene didn't make any sense, or like there's no way this would ever happen like that. So, again, this was like a project where everybody who was involved in it helped me in a big way.
I just have to mention my own experience with copy editors that I love so much. The people that were reading through my manuscript were very dear, and I kept confusing like a door frame with like a lintel. And eventually they drew me a little picture on the manuscript and they were like, this is a lintel. This is something else. Because I was spatially confused, and it's my favorite thing ever that I have from my marked up manuscript. So
right.
I treasure it. Very important work being done there with all the different folks that help make a book come to life.
Right.
Okay. Janelle Cacopardo says, hi, Brian. I'm so excited to read this book. My question is, how many titles did you go through before you decided on The Nightworkers? Also, I miss you.
Hi, Janelle. So yeah, the the title The Nightworkers came from my agent, who I think was also a creative partner and an editor and went through drafts with me. My original title, so the book that I threw away before I wrote The Nightworkers was called Death of a Hipster, which I think is kind of hooky, but it also spoke to, my way of viewing the guy who was a victim, and a lot of the characters was like from a superior kind of supercilious way, like, oh, these foolish hipsters. Versus The Nightworkers, where I do have, a significant emotional connection, even to people who aren't doing things that I agree with. So then the next significant draft was called Corpses of Me, and my agent convinced me to change the title, and she was the one who came up with the title The Nightworkers, and people liked that from the beginning, and I liked it too. So yeah, I'd say that Jenny Ferrari Adler is the best agent in history, one of the most important people in history, and the best titler, retitler. So thank you, Jenny, for many things, including that. I don't even know if she's on here. It might be past her bedtime.
Titles are really hard. Like, they seem like they would be something easy and fast, and it's sometimes a struggle.
Can you talk about how you named the best bad things?
Yeah, originally it was called Cipher, which I thought was really cool because like a code cipher, and also the main character is kind of I thought it was being very clever. And then the feedback was that it sounded like it was sci-fi. So I actually pulled the phrase "the best bad things" from this amazing letter that was found in the archives about a guy who was writing home from the gold rush in California. And his letter said, like, then out here in San Francisco, they have all like the best guns, the best women, the best like bejeweled pistols, the best liquor, all the best bad things money could buy. And I was like, this is sweet. So yeah, the line in the book that mentions it actually kind of pays homage to that letter in the phrasing. So I thought it was a cool title, and then it ended up being, I love it. I think it's perfect, but it took a little bit of a journey. So
right. No, it's a great title. I have thought, and I'm still thinking, and maybe I should get your permission later, to title a story or maybe even a future book The Worst Good Things, and have it be sort of about somebody who gets a lot of what they're supposed to want, but then they're unhappy with it. Yeah.
Right. They're like, I don't even like bejeweled pistols and liquor. Like, this is
right.
Someone might say that.
It's possible.
I know. I feel like the next one could be like the worst bad things, the bestest bad. Like, it'll go on from there. Let's see. Megan Carroll says, did working as a public defender investigator change anything you originally wrote in the book while working at the prosecutor's office, or change your perspective on any characters or situations you'd already wrote? And she says, from Megan Carroll, so excited your book is finally out.
So thank you, Megan. It's good to hear from you through Zoom. Yeah, I mean, Megan and Janelle, who just asked the previous question, were people who maybe saw me go out for lunch so I could go work in a cafe on this book. Yeah, they worked with me. So wait, I've actually forgotten Megan's question now. I was just so excited to hear from her.
Did working as a public defender investigator change anything you originally wrote while you were working at the prosecutor's office, or change your perspective on any of the characters or situations you'd already written?
Oh, okay. So thank you for repeating that. So I I really was, even from my very first wiretap, maybe back in 2003, like really liking, not everybody, but a lot of the people that I was listening to. I mean, there are cases where somebody does something terrible and you just have no, like, why would you ever do anything like this? This is horrible. But in most cases, I really felt if I spent a lot of time with a person, sometimes I felt sorry for them, or sometimes I just thought like they were kind of funny. So I was able to, I mean, I didn't do this on purpose, but I would just find some kind of connection with whoever we were looking at. So I don't think that the switch to being a public defender necessarily changed my perspective with regard to the book, but I think it was part of a continuum that I was shifting from maybe like a childish sense of like good guys and bad guys to a still developing, not complete understanding that, people are people. And I think that, even working at the prosecutor's office, or I should say, especially working at the prosecutor's office, got me thinking in that direction.
I think we might have time for only one more. And now I have to choose. I'm sorry to everyone that if I can't choose your question, I'm going to ask one that I think is a new one. Has the experience of carrying this book to completion caused you to look again at some of your earlier attempts, which I think is interesting from like a craft perspective as you develop as an author?
I am looking ahead. I think that my earlier attempts, most of them taught me something, but the Nightworkers was really the book that, by working on it and revising it a million times with many edits from different people, was where I learned to put feeling into characters. So the earlier ones, there might be a plot or two there that's maybe something salvageable, but I kind of think that the plot isn't as important to me as the characters. Like, I want to have a plot that'll make it interesting enough that people will want to read the book. But in order to keep going back and back to a scene to make it work, I need to be connected to the characters. So it's a long way of saying, I'm not forgetting all of those earlier stories that I worked on, but I'm not excited to read any of them. And I think if you're going to spend a couple of years or maybe more than a couple of years on a book, you really want to have something that you're going to be excited about.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think it's difficult with the writing process sometimes because you have to learn by doing. So there's so many things you leave along the road, but each one you're learning something. So
right. And Sam is here to gong us off the stage.
Yes, just in time.
You should get a gong just to hit it.
I always show up. Just like right, I just need a little one. Yeah, I always show up precisely when I mean to. What a great way of looking at craft, and I think really like doing anything, learning to do anything. There's always stuff that you're kind of leaving along the way aside for later. Thank you both so much. This has been a lovely evening, and I'm so glad that you were able to spend your Friday night, at least a little portion of it, with us here at Third Place Books. And thank you so much for the great conversation, the great recommendations, and Brian, thank you for this book. It's been a treat to read. We are so excited to have it out in the world. The book is The Nightworkers. It is out just this week. Just came out on Tuesday. A beautiful hardcover edition from our friends at FSG MCD Editions. Daphne, who the much lauded Daphne is I see in the chat there. She has been watching. Hi, Daphne. An amazing editor working with amazing writers like Brian Selfon and Katrina Carrasco, and we are so glad that they're having these books out in the world. We've dropped some links in the chat to pick up these books that we were talking about this evening, including The Nightworkers and The Best Bad Things. And definitely, like I say, if you're not hooked already, you will be. Very first page, both of those books. So do pick them up. If you're out of the Seattle area, we'll ship these books to you. If you're here in Seattle, we would be happy to put one or both aside for you to pick up at one of our 3 stores. And we're just so delighted to have you here, and we thank you for your support. Wherever you're joining us from tonight, we are so glad that you were here with us. And Brian Selfon, Katrina Carrasco, thank you so much for this wonderful conversation.
Thank you very much for having us. Again, I encourage everybody to shop from Third Place Books. It's a great bookstore. They hosted this event, and really appreciate your time. Thank you, Katrina, for this talk. This has been fun. I'm very lucky to know you, so thank you.
Oh, congratulations. I'm so happy your book is out in the world, and I'm excited people get to read it.
Thank you. And I also want to give a shout out to the future book, Chelsea Avenue, which will be another book that I think people will be excited about in a year or two.
Keep an eye out for it. You heard it here first. Wherever you're joining us from tonight, thank you. Do good work. Read good books. Be safe, and we will see you next time. Thanks, everybody. Good night.
Bye.